Excellencies, distinguished moderators, speakers, and guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening from Jakarta. Welcome to the ASEAN Institute for Peace and Reconciliation Discussion Series 2021. This evening's session is taking up the theme Peace Processes Beyond ASEAN, Sharing of Best Practices and Lessons Learned. A very special session this evening, as you may already be aware, 18 November coincides with the 9th year of the establishment of the ASEAN-IPR. We are still a very young organization, still have many things to learn, muscles to develop, but we are fortunate in that we can always learn and draw experiences from the experiences of other organizations in answering some of the toughest challenges in the world. How do we achieve and maintain peace, particularly in the current global geopolitical settings? We have arranged a very special lineup of speakers in this session to help answer this question. But to start off the evening, I would like to invite the Executive Director of the ASEAN-IPR, Ambassador I Gusti Agung Wasaka Puja, to deliver his opening remarks. Idi Puja, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Kartika. Good evening from Jakarta. We are so grateful that this event today, we have about 270 registered participants. It is truly a distinct pleasure for me to welcome you all to the 6th session of the ASEAN Peace and Reconciliation Discussion Series 2021, specially convened in the conjunction with ASEAN-IPR's 9th anniversary today. What is the true meaning of an anniversary? It is indeed beyond a celebration, beyond a ceremony, beyond a festivity. It is a moment of evaluation, a moment of reflection, and a moment of judgment. Today, 9 years ago, 18th of November 2012 in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, on the occasion of officially launching the Institute at the sidelines of the 21st ASEAN Summit, the ASEAN leaders re-emphasized the importance of promoting conflict resolution and conflict management to enhance peace, security, and stability in the regions. They look forward to the full and effective operationalization of the Institute so as to contribute to the interests of ASEAN in this regard. Ever since its launch, the ASEAN-IPR has continuously pursued endeavors to spread the message of positive peace in the region. Recalling of the action lines in the ASEAN Political Security Community Blueprint 2025, ASEAN-IPR purports to enhance dialogue and cooperation with the United Nations and other regional and international organizations on peacekeeping through information sharing on best practices, as well as capacity building in peacekeeping and post-conflict peace building. Following this, ASEAN-IPR has held several initiatives to facilitate the talks and strengthen cooperations in building regional culture of peace. ASEAN-IPR marked 2018 by holding the first initiative done by the Secretariat, a workshop with the United Nations Department of Political Affairs. The workshop highlighted the best practices and lessons learned on ceasefires and cessation of facilities from ASEAN while looking at global trends and comparative examples from other regions. In addition, as an effort to promote women's meaningful participation in peace processes, the ASEAN-IPR established the ASEAN Women for Peace Registry, OPER, in 2018, providing a medium for women to actively participate and share their knowledge and experience on peace processes across the region. Furthermore, pursuant to the Institute's research, capacity building, and dissemination of information functions, we have initiated several activities, namely research on the Mindanao and Aceh peace processes, mainstreaming peace and reconciliation in Southeast Asia training series, Youth Tech Workshop and Training, and the ASEAN-IPR Working Paper Series on Peace and Conflict Resolutions, just to name a few. These aforementioned milestones of ASEAN-IPR serve to reflect the Institute's devotions to promoting positive peace in the region. For almost a decade of its establishment now, ASEAN-IPR is anchored upon the belief that peace shall continually be fostered and forget. Peace is not about singing Kumbaya, my Lord. Peace is not about a white dove flying over a rainbow carrying a branch of olive tree. We must believe in peace, not only talk about it. And it is not enough to believe in it. We must work at it. As the world is ever-changing, conflict continues to become more complex and interconnected. The COVID-19 pandemic serves as a testament to this. We have witnessed how the COVID-19 pandemic prompted conflicts around the world and how it also exacerbated the strains occurring in peace processes. As a public health crisis, the pandemic demonstrates a non-traditional threat to peace and security in the ASEAN region. Against such a background, through today's discussion series, we hope to exchange the best practices and lessons learned with other regional and sub-regional organizations beyond Southeast Asia, particularly in regards to their role and experiences to prevent, manage, and resolve conflict. But certainly, exchanging the best practices is not enough. We must be innovative, as no one size fits all in this endeavor. As said, implementing best practices is copying yesterday. Innovation is inventing tomorrow. We cannot discover new oceans unless we have the courage to lose sight of the shore. Acknowledging the emerging contemporary challenges to peace, I hope this discussion shall also serve as a medium for us to address these challenges and envision ways to enhance activities to promote and strengthen peace across the globe. And ASEAN should raise above the dynamics to manage the challenges. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, ASEAN-IPR is built upon the visions to further strengthen peace-oriented values towards harmony, peace, and stability in our region and beyond, with the mission to serve as the ASEAN institution for research and capacity building activities on peace, conflict management, and conflict resolutions. Both this vision and mission can only be achieved by the support of ASEAN member states, as well as active cooperation and collaborations with other peace-oriented actors. Therefore, ASEAN-IPR is sincerely grateful to our stakeholders, including governments of ASEAN member states, members of ASEAN-IPR Governing Council and Advisory Board, members of the ASEAN Women's for Peace Registry, fellow think tanks and research institutes, ASEAN Dialogue partners, donors, as well as all our friends for their continuous support and contribution throughout these years. We are looking forward for more robust support for the next years as we are celebrating our 10th anniversary under chairmanship of Cambodia, a déjà vu. On these happy occasions, I offer cordial greetings to our moderator and speakers, Dr. Ketut Putra Erawan, Dr. Christina Horvath-Stenner, Ms. Mukondeleli, Mpeiwa, Ms. Marian, Vidaurri, and Ms. Teresa Whitfield, as well as to our distinguished guests, including members of the Governing Council, Advisory Board, ASEAN Women Peace for Peace Registry, and other participants joining us this evening. My special tribute to Ambassador Reslan Jenny, the first executive director of ASEAN-IPR, who have laid a strong foundation for the ASEAN-IPR to move forward. He left a very big shoes for me to step in. I would also like to extend my gratitude to the embassies of Ireland and Finland in Jakarta for their support of the ASEAN-IPR discussion series 2021. Lastly, on behalf of the ASEAN-IPR, I thank you all for your presence here today on the 9th anniversary of the ASEAN-IPR. And we are looking forward to a lively discussion that hopefully will generate a fruitful outcome that shall promote positive peace across the globe, including our regions. I believe that the best way to get a good idea is to have a lot of ideas. But perfection can be the enemy of the goods, as we are fully aware that there are no quick wins. Building lasting peace takes time and requires a concerted effort. I thank you. Over to you back, Kartika.
Thank you, ED Puja. I now have the honor to invite the first Executive Director of ASEAN-IPR, His Excellency Ambassador Rezlan Isharjeni, to deliver his congratulatory remarks. Over to you, Pak Rezlan.
Thank you very much, Kartika. Well, let me first thank Executive Director Visakha Puja for inviting me to this ASEAN-IPR discussion series. And thank you very much, Pak Puja, for your very kind words. It's very nice to hear that. Well, taking part in the ASEAN-IPR activity feels like being home again and brings back good memories. 2021 marks 9 years of the Institute's existence. So as you said, Pak Puja, next year ASEAN-IPR will celebrate its 10 years anniversary. Looking back at what the Institute has achieved during these 9 years, and here I like to stress only the last 4 years with the fully operational secretariat, one can say it's a good job done. In 2018, the Institute secured a solid foundation for the Secretariat governance and administrative support, and thereby ensuring the Institute's capability to strongly pursue its mandate as stipulated in its terms of reference. Since having the Secretariat, the Institute has been able to carry out more planned activities than before that reflects a robust program of interaction with various stakeholders, be it with governments of external partners of ASEAN, the United Nations, as well as reputable civil society institutions and think tanks from ASEAN and beyond. And what is worth mentioning is that in the Institute activities, in its many activities, among other, it has focused on looking into best practices of conflict resolution in ASEAN. Puja has mentioned the Mindanao peace processes as facilitated by Indonesia in 1993-1996, and I understand that the second research project is ongoing on the Aceh peace process, looking at the interconnection between humanitarian assistance and peace building. ASEAN-IPR has also focused on the youth potential by convening an ASEAN Youth Conference on Peace and Tolerance in Jakarta to look into how youth could contribute in building a culture of peace at the community level. And as Pak Puja again has said, mindful of the crucial role of women in peace processes, the Institute launched an ASEAN Women for Peace registry, which is an effort to build part of the effort to build a pool of experts in conflict management and conflict resolution as prescribed in its terms of reference. And I think mention should be also said here about the first women interfaith dialogue that was organized by ASEAN-IPR. I mean, this is the first ever women interfaith dialogue to give a platform for women narratives in this exercise where for so long has been dominated by male narratives. And the Institute has also started its series of training for ASEAN officials on conflict resolution, conflict management and transformation, and post-conflict peace building. Well, of course, there are many other activities that have been conducted in this past 9 years, and these activities has been communicated through a wider audience, especially the people of ASEAN, through the website of ASEAN-IPR. That was one of the first achievements of ASEAN in trying and ensuring its outreach towards people of ASEAN. Well, I think I would like to conclude by conveying my warmest congratulations to ASEAN-IPR on its 9th birthday. And I take pride here being the first ED during the challenging formative years of the Secretariat. Looking forward to see ASEAN-IPR's continued activism, dynamism, and contribution in the next 10 years amidst the many challenges facing the region, such as the continuing COVID-19 pandemic, the current conflict in Myanmar, climate change, and geopolitical rivalry between the big powers. So ASEAN-IPR, good luck, and go ASEAN-IPR. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Reslan, and thank you as well, for leading the Institute in the first years since establishment and the first years of the Secretariat itself. Thank you, sir. Last but not least, I invite the chair of the ASEAN-IPR Governing Council, Her Excellency Ambassador Pangeran Hairani Pangeran Tajuddin, to deliver her congratulatory remarks. Ambassador, the time is yours.
Thank you very much, Kartika, for giving me the screen. ASEAN-IPR Executive Director, Pak Puja, and distinguished panelists and participants for this discussion series this evening. So a very good evening, a very good morning, a very good afternoon, depending where you are in the world today. My appreciation to Executive Director Puja for inviting me to deliver remarks at the 6th iteration of the ASEAN-IPR discussion series 2021. I commend Pak Puja and his team for the dedication to ensure the continued momentum of the ASEAN-IPR activities while we continue the struggle to be living in a pandemic. The topic of this evening's discussion series, the peace processes beyond ASEAN, sharing of best practices and lessons learned, is a timely and important one. And this is demonstrated by, as Pak Puja mentioned, the number of participants who registered to attend the series. We understand that there are no one-size-fits-all approach in the journey towards peace or in managing any types of conflicts, but there are a lot of valuable lessons that could be learned from all the experiences, which is why platforms such as this is all the more important, as ASEAN itself is also not immune to complex challenges and conflicts. It's an opportunity to understand our strengths, what certain groups are more, what roles they can play, things like that. So I really look forward to listening to the speakers today. So just wanted to be short. I wanted to conclude. Thank you, ASEAN-IPR, for organizing the discussion series, and also to the Embassy of Ireland and Finland for their support. My thanks also to the moderator and the speakers who will share their own experiences today. And so thank you for your time, and I wish the series a fruitful one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Hairani. As per ASEAN practice, we would now do a group photo. So I would like to invite all the distinguished speakers, moderators, Ambassador Hairani, Ambassador Rezlan, to please activate your camera. And we will have colleagues from the Secretariat who will take a picture. I will count down. We will give you another second or two, waiting for Ms. Mpeiwa to be tagged. Okay, colleagues, on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3. And I'll just turn off mine. One more. 1, 2, 3. And just for extra measures, 1, 2, 3. Thank you very much, Excellencies. Okay. Now, before we start, of course, we have some house rules to convey. As usual, please adhere to the house rules that we have listed in the chat box in terms of the format of questions and where to deliver your questions. Please use the Q&A box if you are in Zoom, and you may use the live chat box if you are following us from YouTube. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to have as moderator this evening, Dr. Ketut Putra Erawan, the Executive Director of the Institute for Peace and Democracy. Dr. Erawan is an active scholar and researcher working on democracy issues in the Asia-Pacific region and beyond. He's the Executive Director of IPD, an Indonesian think tank and the implementing agency of the Bali Democracy Forum. He was a special advisor for the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia, an expert for the Ministry of Interior Affairs, and have served as consultants for projects under the World Bank Institute, UNDP, and various Indonesian agencies. Without further ado, Dr. Erawan, I now hand over the discussion to you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kartika. Is my voice? Can you hear my voice?
Yes, sir, we can hear you clearly.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I just start moderating by welcoming all of you, and I cite the point made by our Executive Director, Pak Puja. Anniversary is a moment for evaluation and reflect. To prepare this meeting, I read 2 books. One is about conflict resolution after the pandemic. So it's already exists a book like that. And the second one is a contemporary conflict in Southeast Asia toward a new ASEAN way. So these 2 books about ASEAN way, and the other is about future conflict resolution after the pandemic. But this 2 books is not enough without learning the practical experiences in the field from many parts of the world. So today we will discuss how those experiences can be a lesson learned not only for people in ASEAN, but also from other parts of the world also. And ASEAN in this anniversary need to reflect, evaluate, and learn, particularly from these pertinent countries or regions. We have 4 speakers, the important one. Let me first introduce our first speaker, Dr. Christina Horvath-Stenner. I need to read your profile a little bit. Okay, Dr. Christina Horvath-Stenner is a mediation support officer from the OSCE Conflict Prevention Center. She provides mediation advice to the OSCE Special Representative to the Transnistrian settlement process in Moldova and trilateral contact groups in Ukraine, and partly to the Geneva International Discussion, particularly Georgia. She support numerous OSCE field operation and their mediation and dialogue facilitation engagement. Her expertise lies in the process design, negotiation skills. Dr. Horvath-Stenner is a trained mediator, and she completed her practical work experiences with academic and research as a research fellow at Center for International Peace and Operation, Berlin. Examining the intersection of humanitarian and political affairs and also expertise to start our nice discussion for tonight. Okay, Dr. Christina, screen is yours for around 15 to 20 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Erawan, and thank you also for ASEAN-IPR to invite me here to these discussions, and in particular for the interest in the OSCE. I hope you can understand me well and clear. I will share my screen because I prepared a little like a presentation, because some visuals sometimes may help to understand our organization, which is quite specific. So just let me share the screen. Just a second. You see it already, I think. Yeah, so I'm really flattered to have the opportunity to introduce you to the OSCE today. It's a very fascinating organization. I'm working for it since my last 7 years and still think it's fascinating how this organization is set up. And it may be even inspire some other regions in the world who think about some other joint ventures. And it's worthwhile to look at the OSCE a little bit closer, because often people ask me, why is the OSCE not doing anything in this and that specific country or region, or why are we doing in particular the other things they didn't expect? And often the answer lies in this in the setup of the organization, which is, as I said, very specific. So I will just briefly introduce you to the genesis of the organization, and then zoom in how we operationally work. And then, of course, with a focus on the conflict resolution mechanisms. And then I have a few thoughts, or food for thought for the broader audience, some considerations to share, for example, also on COVID-19 and the effects. I'm very happy to answer any questions at the end and contribute to a lively discussion. So the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, is the world's largest regional security organization. We, back in the times of the Cold War, the states of the two blocs convened in a conference. So there was a conference who served as a platform for East and Western states to approach each other. And by 1970, there was in Helsinki the final act agreed or signed who committed to this conference. Back then it was called the CSCE. So after the fall of the Iron Curtain and also the breakup of the Soviet Union, these states committed to joint values, to principles, and all that got signed again in its charter in 1990, which was then the origin or the starting point to transform this one-time conference actually into an institutionalized organization. And then that's how out of the C became the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. So until now, we have 57 participating states and 11 partners for cooperation. For example, we have the partners in the Mediterranean area and also in the Asian area. And if I'm not too wrong, Thailand is the only state who is a partner of the OSCE and also, as you know, a member state of the ASEAN. So what are these specifics I just mentioned? First of all, it's very important to understand that the OSCE is still in its setup and in its legal setup a prolonged conference. That's why, for example, we speak of participating states and not member states like the UN. It's a conference, meaning it's still until today set up like a platform where these 57 states are able to meet in different formats on different levels. It is not a closed club. So that means that we also do not have some kind of decision-making body such as the Security Council. And sometimes we are very jealous and sometimes we are not on something like the Security Council. The political guidance, which is still there, is provided by a yearly changing chairship. This year, for example, it's Sweden. Next year, Poland is taking over the chair and giving some priorities and guidelines for that year. We also have a secretariat and not a headquarter. So as you can imagine, a conference is hard to have a headquarter. A conference can have a secretariat supporting the participating states when meeting. That's why just some minor difference. That's why we have a Secretary General and not like the UN, a Secretary General with this dash in between. This is a very important difference. And very important as well, we are a consensus-based organization. So all the decisions are based on consensus. So what does it mean concretely? For example, we had the situation that all our computers, and I will be very trivial and pragmatic in my example, all computers had to receive a new update, a new software update, and even that had to be decided on consensus basis by all 57 participating states. So you can imagine these negotiations about the budget and the investments and the operational areas can be very, very difficult. In particular, when it's even more political than a software update. For example, how to engage in which conflicts, who are the lead mediators, who is the co-mediator, what about all these norms regarding freedom of the media, inclusivity, etc. So this is very political. So there is an executive structure, as I mentioned. It's the chairship in office, which is the foreign minister of that particular country, Sweden this year. And as mentioned, we support our participating states and this chairship in office in engaging and meeting on all different levels. For example, every week on ambassador level, these 57 states, participating states meet in the permanent council here in Vienna, in the Hofburg. Then once a year, coming up this year in December, they meet on foreign minister level in the ministerial council. And if there's a request, there are also summits. There's also the Forum for Security Cooperation, which deals with military exercises and further security items, also meeting on a weekly basis. So again, we are a regional organization and we are recognized under Chapter 8 of the UN Charter. We are a civilian-based organization, meaning we do not have military or police staff. We are purely civilian. We have monitors, as you may know, for example, in the Nagorno-Karabakh region or in Eastern Ukraine, but they are still civilian. Our primary, we are the primary instrument for early warning in our region, for conflict and crisis prevention, conflict resolution, crisis management, post-conflict rehabilitation, and peace building. So all these terms, most of you are probably very aware of, are at the OSCE called the conflict cycle. So now I bombard you with this very complicating looking slide, but actually just focus on the red boxes, which tries to indicate a kind of circle from early warning and early action through conflict prevention, where, by the way, mediation is assigned to, then crisis response and management, and also the post-conflict issues, rehabilitation and peace building. So this is the conflict cycle. And so who is engaging on conflicts at the OSCE? As mentioned, we have the chairpersonship, which is Sweden at the moment, and each chairship, besides being this the political guidance for that specific year, is also allowed to assign special and or personal representatives. These are our lead mediators. For example, there's a special representative for the trilateral contact group, which is the format dealing with the crisis in and around Ukraine. The OSCE Troika just compiles the in and outcoming chairship. As mentioned, we have these Vienna-based delegations and participating states meeting on ambassadorial level. We have our 3 autonomous institutions, 3 independent institutions. So they do not, they're a little bit separate from these consensus discussions on national minorities, human rights, and freedom of the media. The Parliamentary Assembly compiles or is a platform where parliamentarians of all our participating states more or less meet. And there's the Secretary General, as mentioned. It's Helga Maria Schmidt currently, who might be known to some of you because previously in her EU capacity, she was heavily engaged in the Iran talks. And we have different thematic units within the Secretariat, like the Conflict Prevention Center. That is also the department where the mediation support team is based, which I'm a part of. And last but not least, we have 15 field operations. This is also something that distinguishes us from other organizations. More or less, I will show the map. You will see here 15 field operations, which are more or less based in the former Soviet Union countries, as well as on the Balkans. A field operation at the OSCE can only be established on basis of on invitation of the host country. Its mandate needs to be approved by all 57. That's where the consensus appears. And they are very tailor-made. When you look at the map, you see that all these field operations more or less have different names, because that shows that each single case is negotiated and discussed individually, and there are political reasons behind it why these names differ. Sometimes it's a project, sometimes it's a presence, it can be a mission, etc. So they normally have an annual budget and mandate, which means every year they have to be renegotiated and prolonged. Some are shorter, for example, like the special monitoring mission in Ukraine. They have a shorter cycle. Every 6 months they need to be reapproved within its mandate. So where do we engage? Most of you may know that we engage in the crisis in and around Ukraine. Then there are the Geneva international discussions dealing with Georgia, including Abkhazia, South Ossetia. Then we have the Minsk group dealing with the conflict in Armenia, Azerbaijan. And we have the Transnistrian settlement process dealing with Moldova and its breakaway region, Transnistria. So maybe 1 and 2 sentences on how we engage. You see that if you still think of the OSCE as a prolonged conference with always a yearly changing chairship who has the right to assign mediators to our conflicts, you see that it probably is very difficult to become quickly active when there are crises reoccurring or new crises appear. It always has to go through this consensus decision making of all 57 states. There are exceptions. It's like then a consensus -1, it's called. There are different mechanisms who allow for kind of exceptions, for example, when it comes to a fact-finding mission. But in general, it needs to go through consensus. It sounds very tiring and cumbersome, but on the other hand, it gives us a very strong and broad mandate once all 57 agree. For example, the SMM, the Special Monitoring Mission in Ukraine, is consensus-based. So also from the US to Russia, everyone agreed on having this mission on the ground, monitoring the ceasefire. And this gives us a very strong mandate and also protection for our staff on the ground. So consensus is difficult, but once reached, it gives you a great strength. Also, thinking of multilateralism nowadays, I think what I took notice after a while is that following all these negotiations among the 57 states, the OSCE serves as a great seismograph for where multilateralism stands at the moment. So it's also something I found very fascinating to observe, like what are these states concerned of, where do they focus, and how much multilateralism among the 57 is possible or not. So it's really a great seismograph, I think, for the general condition between the states. I'm just checking how much time do I have left. Great, a few minutes. So some few further considerations. I should mention that all our four main conflicts I just mentioned on the slide before are used to call protracted conflicts. One can even be called protracted negotiation because it's not really a conflict anymore. These protracted conflicts are receiving peace processes designed many years, almost and decades, to be honest, ago. So often the criticism is that our peace processes are so fixed and static in their setup that they do not really respond to nowadays challenges. So that's really a challenge we have to deal. And we, as the mediation support team, for example, we always recommend to rethink this setup of the processes because they are too fixed. Yeah, then there is digitization and inclusivity. I think two items I just wanted to flag up here, but they clearly refer to the COVID-19 impacts we all face. Digitization, I think, has many pros and cons. Of course, it's more inclusive. We can reach to a broader public. I think this event is it's a great example for this, to like how we can connect globally. But there's also, I think, sometimes in digitization, like some kind of overconfidence, that we put too much emphasis on digitization in a people's business. We like to think of mediation and conflict resolution. So we really need also to be literate enough to understand and to be able to use this technology, and also to have the resources to continuously use it. For example, we use UAVs. These are like the image drones in certain areas of our conflicts. And of course, the responsibility comes along what to do with what we see. So there is a responsibility also then to react, and we need to be able to react. If we do not have the right legal setup for reaction, that is difficult. Also, maybe, yeah, so we all know the weaponized information that's out there. That's a new challenge also coming from digitization. So there are many pros and cons.
Dr. Christina?
Yes?
Yes, your time is 2 minutes more. Sorry.
Okay, excellent. Yes. Inclusivity, I just wanted to mention that the women inclusion and the distinct analytical view on men and women and how they are affected by conflicts matters a lot at the moment for the OSCE. for us, coming from conflict resolution, I see it very pragmatic. We want to have more sustainable, more effective peace processes, so we should engage the whole of society. And maybe one last word on COVID-19, and I'm happy to respond more in the panel discussion or any other way. At the end, I think COVID-19 hit the OSCE region as many other regions in the world and just made fragile states who were fragile beforehand even more fragile. And this also refers to the conflicts. And at the same time, it offers opportunities to induce some changes in these, for example, fixed formats, to think newly about inclusivity and digitization. So COVID-19, yes, has a very negative effect, but we can also pick up the momentum to induce some positive change and to try out new things. And I just wanted to flag a few headlines here of publications we did. I can come back to that, for example, on women inclusion or insider mediation or CBMs, confidence building measures. But last but not least, I also wanted to mention that there are further publications I didn't put there, but I'm happy, like on COVID-19 and its impacts, I'm happy to share, but then it's better to write an email to me. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm sorry, I turned off my video because I think the stability of my connection is not guaranteed. So I just use my voice. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Dr. Christina. Your elaboration already cover all of the dimension we want to start to discuss about the rules, governance, how is the field operation. Possibly, maybe one day ASEAN will be moving into the direction, but also the process engagement to make sure that the host country, the recipient countries, and also the supporting countries want to participate. So the process will be totally legitimate and sustainable in the long run. Okay, let me introduce the second speaker, Ms. Mukondeleli Mpeiwa. She is acting head of Mediation and Dialogue Division, African Union, and she is experienced international relation professional in the diplomacy, peace and security, and migration management fields. She leads the African Union's mediation, crisis response, and preventive diplomacy arms. She was also at one point the coordinator of WISE Africa, the Continental Network of African Women in the mediation conflict prevention, with 400 members from the 46 African countries, bringing in the age, expertise, and experience. Ms. Mukondeleli, we are eager and curious to wait for the African experiences. The screen is yours.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Moderator. Your Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, good afternoon. I had asked just to be introduced as Mukondeleli, and that I lead the Mediation and Dialogue Division of the African Union Commission, so that we frame our conversation specifically around what I do now, because what I was doing previously might interfere a little bit or juxtapose in some ways the topic for today. But thank you very much once again for that very kind introduction. I will try and limit my remarks to the specific questions that you have posed, so that I respond a little bit to some of the preoccupations you may be having as ASEAN as you continue to evolve as ASEAN-IPR. I am officially on leave, so I will not be able to stay long beyond the presentation because I have some family commitments that I have also signed up for, unfortunately, because of our time. Yes, so I apologize in advance for that. So now that I have the apologies, the formalities and introductions out of the way, I would like to also switch off the video because our internet connection is a bit unstable. So please pardon me for that as well. So as you have already introduced, I work for the African Union Commission, and the African Union is a 55-member state organization that coordinates its affairs through a multi-sectoral commission that is based in Ethiopia, in Addis Ababa. If you would like to know more about how the African Union Commission is structured and also interfaces with its member states and also the different sectors in which we work, you are most welcome, and I invite you to go on to www.au.int and you will find all of our information there, including on our peace and security related endeavors. On the topic of today, I am going to just briefly share with you our experiences and expertise as AU, but focusing, of course, quite a lot on the political affairs, peace and security department, which combines governance and conflict resolution issues, and also then look at some of the structures and mechanisms that we have and give you some practical examples and scenarios, because we do have quite a lot of experience in conflict resolution, conflict prevention, and now also the interface or firm relationship between governance, elections, and conflict prevention, and linking our electoral support for our member states to our conflict prevention through preventive diplomacy under election observation missions generally. That is a mouthful, but let me try and contextualize a little bit by backtracking. So the African Union has got extensive structures and experiences in the prevention and resolution of conflict, including in reconciliation and peace building, which we usually undertake in the post-conflict reconstruction and development phase. We have what we call the African Peace and Security Architecture, which is a comprehensive structure that includes the policies, the resourcing, the tools, frameworks, and actors that we deploy as the African Union to conflicts that are on the African continent. This African Peace and Security Architecture is made up of our African Standby Force. Sorry, something is happening, my apologies. It's made up of the African Standby Force, the Peace Fund, which finances our work, especially the Emergency Response Facility. We also have the Conflict Early Warning System, which is basically a regionally structured entity that provides our early warning analysis on a day-to-day basis. And this, I think, is at the heart of the interventions that the African Union makes, but also informs day-to-day the process design and the decisions on the tools to be deployed and the sequencing and so forth. We have also the Panel of the Wise and its subsidiary mechanisms. The Panel of the Wise is made up of 5 eminent persons from one of each of the 5 regions of the African continent. It can be a head of state, or my apologies, a former head of state, former minister, former ambassador, a business person, someone in civil society, nominated through regional consultations by the nation or the member states that make up the regional entities, and then, of course, the continental body, which is the African Union. So those 5 eminent persons serve for a period of 3 years, which is renewable once, so a total maximum of 6 years. And of course, we encourage a gender balance in the composition of the panel, and we usually have either 3 males or 3 females on the panel. The panel itself undertakes mediation support and mediation related missions. It also takes conflict prevention, preventive diplomacy, good offices, and all of those type of interventions throughout the conflict cycle. But over and above their specific work, the Panel of the Wise also works through its subsidiary mechanisms, which it created, which is FemWise Africa and the Pan-African Network of the Wise. The Pan-African Network of the Wise encompasses structures similar to the Panel of the Wise throughout the African continent. That means these are drawn from the regional economic communities and the regional mechanisms that make up the continent, and as well as other structures outside of the regional blocks from member states, especially focusing on civil society actors that are involved in conflict resolution and conflict prevention from the grassroots level, regional, national, up until we get to the continental level. So through this panel and its subsidiary mechanisms, we are trying to create a bottom-up and top-bottom structure that meets in the middle, as it were, in terms of conflict prevention and conflict resolution actors, recognizing and also amplifying the role of women and the role of youth in conflict prevention and conflict resolution. Our processes also take into account and really put a spotlight on the role of indigenous conflict resolution mechanisms and processes, and tries in many ways to infuse new knowledge and approaches in that, harnessing technology, but also harnessing new knowledge, including a newly defined or crafted role for young people and women in our cultural and indigenous conflict resolution processes, simply because historically women have had a back seat, as it were, in most contexts in conflict resolution using traditional mechanisms. So we are now trying to address this by empowering local structures, but also enhancing the gender mainstreaming aspects that should inform a whole of society approach. We also work as the African Union, but also as with the regional economic communities and mechanisms. We also work, of course, with the United Nations and our member states directly. And all of our interactions, including with international cooperating partners, is going towards building and defining new smart partnerships that go beyond the donor-recipient kind of relationship, that also seeks to legitimize some of the knowledge that we generate, legitimize and recognize our contributions also to global peace and security, but also change the narrative in many ways about Africa as a conflict affected area, but a conflict stage for other conflicts that should be playing out on the international stage or in other contexts outside of our continent. But I will speak to this in a little bit more detail shortly. In terms of our experiences, the African Union continues to work in the 5 regions of the continent to prevent, resolve, and manage conflicts, including, especially lately, in the Horn of Africa, in Mali and the Sahel, in the Lake Chad Basin area, the Sudans, to name but just a few. A lot of the work that we do is done through, of course, the commission itself, based out of Addis Ababa, but also working through our liaison officers on the ground, which are often led by special representatives of the African Union Commission chairperson. Of course, our work has been greatly affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. And this plays itself out in terms of the actual conflict dynamics, but in many ways also in our response. Specifically, the nature of conflict has changed quite considerably on the African continent over the last almost 2 years now. We have seen more popular uprisings. We have seen an interesting combination of military, civil takeovers from constitutionally elected or democratically elected rather governments. We have seen an interesting or strange new combination that mixes insurgencies with a combination of radicalism, but very strong economic motives and drivers. So the interaction between radicalization and poverty, but not necessarily with a very strong political or religious or any other sort of inclination, but really focused on economic and financial motivations. But of course, combined with a strong influx of small arms and light weapons across the continent, feeding, of course, from the different conflicts that are at play across the continent, from north to south, west to east, and of course, central. We have, however, also seen a very, very visible foreign interference and negative involvement of external actors in conflict contexts across the continent, including in the instigation and incitement of conflict. Of course, not forgetting about the weaponization of the digital media, social media as a deliverer and facilitator of hate speech, incitement, and so forth. But all of this contributing to what we are now seeing are proxy wars happening on the African continent at the expense of African lives and African infrastructure and development. And this is a great, great, great concern for us because we are strongly of the view that our money and time and lives could be spent better addressing our own issues instead of being a battlefield for the mainly economic and geopolitical contestations that are happening. In terms of the evolution of conflict itself and how the landscape is changing, of course, governments since the COVID-19 pandemic hit have been under increasingly more pressure to deliver socioeconomically. And this is happening, of course, within the context of higher debt, lower revenues, and growing, bulging populations across the continent, increasingly, educated young people who do not find jobs and who do not find livelihood and entrepreneurship opportunities, demanding better services and welfare support, access to land, access to resources, and so forth, from a state that is working with very little resources and contesting demands and needs. We have, of course, relatedly seen higher militarization of youth in electoral and other democratic processes. So the youth are being used, their frustrations being channeled to put in and change regimes at an alarming rate, but also to affect the outcomes of political processes and electoral processes based, of course, on often unrealistic expectations. And this, of course, is the beginning of the next conflict. And this, of course, is very worrisome for us. And included in this, of course, is again the issue of foreign interference. I think those are the general implications of COVID on our conflict stage and conflict context on the African continent. However, it's also worth pointing out that for women specifically, and women peacemakers and peace builders, of course, in addition to socioeconomic pressures, we are also dealing with a surge in sexual and gender-based violence that is rearing its head also at an alarming rate, with an increase also in femicide. But we have seen, even in recent reports, as recent as last week, an increase in rape also as a weapon of war, but the intensity and the what is the word? The intensity and also the dehumanization that comes with some of the gender-based violence acts that come with conflict on the continent of late is of great concern to us. And I think this is something that we also need to think through and work through and with our member states and other partners in trying to address, also because social media plays a role in this. One of the major implications of the pandemic has been, of course, as everybody knows, the almost global lockdowns, which have forced us, almost all of us, to leverage each other's strengths and comparative advantages, highlighting especially the key role of local peace builders and indigenous conflict resolution structures and methods in our work, because they are on the ground, able to respond more timeously. It's cheaper, but it's also more sustainable for those who are invested in the conflict to also be the ones to respond to and address with our support. So working through and with these structures, in our view, legitimizes them, but also legitimizes their methods and their knowledge generation, and helps us ultimately in building national peace infrastructure and supporting our member states in building those structures in an organic way that is sustainable and doesn't demand too much resources, but also is recognized structures amongst actors that largely know each other and work with each other, but also sometimes are conflicting parties in conflict situations and are able then to work together and in some ways foster reconciliation. Finally, what lessons have we learned as Africans and as the African Union in conflict resolution during these trying times? I will give you only 5 so that we also give the next speaker enough time to share their views. The first one is the need for Africa and Africans to take charge in our own affairs. We have had these conversations repeatedly, but today more than ever, we are awake to the fact that we are not the ones in the driving seat and influencing and fueling many of the conflicts that are happening on our continent. And we would obviously need to take the responsibility to also alert others to this grave possibility that if you don't pay attention, you will spend a lot of time and money, lives and effort contributing to conflict resolution in many countries in your regions that for conflicts that could have been avoided and should actually be playing out elsewhere. So not every partner is a useful partner, and not every party is an honest party in terms of the conflict situations at hand. And increasingly,
Ms. Mukondeleli, hello?
Yes, please. Yes.
You have 2 minutes more, please.
Thank you very much. Our second lesson learned is the need to support, strengthen, and endorse indigenous structures and approaches to conflict resolution as first responders. The third one, which is more general, political will and ripeness are critical ingredients to sustainable conflict resolution. Experience has taught us that without local ownership and leadership, relapse is likely. We cannot be seen to want the peace more than the parties themselves. The media is number 4, and social media is being weaponized as a tool of division and hate, including through fake news. We need to counter this narrative. Finally, the link between governance, peace, security, and development has to be made stronger and firmer, and we need to invest more in development in order to make our efforts and interventions more sustainable. Thank you very much for the kind invitation and the opportunity to share our thoughts with you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Ms. Mukondeleli. So many important points have been raised by these 2 speakers. From our second one, at least we can take notes about the need of regional actors in charge. That's a really strong point made by Ms. Mukondeleli. The indigenous adaptation and also mainstreaming this kind of approach to the mediation and conflict resolution, political will, and how to respond to the social media, which is the already weaponized to enhance conflict beside making peace. So a really important point made by these 2 speakers. Let us come to the third speaker, Ms. Marian Vidaurri. Yes, Ms. Marian Vidaurri, which is advisor to Secretary General of Organization of American States, OAS. She's also previously served as a section chief for the political analysis team at the Secretariat for Strengthening Democracy. She was director for political studies at FUSADES, El Salvador, and also worked as a journalist and in the academic in Central America. She's a doctor of international affairs, candidate class 2023, and at the School of Advanced International Studies, says of Johns Hopkins University in Washington DC. Without ado, screen is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. And Good morning to everyone. Good morning, Excellencies. We're so happy to be here. I wish to thank ASEAN-IPR for inviting the OAS, making it part of this very important conversation. And by the way, happy birthday on your 9th birthday. It's great to celebrate this day with you today. The COVID pandemic has impacted profoundly individuals, societies, governments, and international institutions, and has reset the way we interact with each other, how we work, how we educate our children, how we access goods and services, how we access rights, and importantly, how elected leaders and international organizations respond to grievances, conflicts, and crises. As the oldest regional organization in the world, the Organization of American States has experienced and overcome important tectonic shifts throughout its history, such as the 2 world wars, a Cold War marred by a rise in dictatorships, insurgencies, and civil wars, a post-Cold War phase characterized by important peace processes and transitions to democracy, as well as the most recent chapter that ended, which is the post-9/11 conflict international scenario after the withdrawal of the United States from Afghanistan. And now we're in this new phase, the during and post-COVID phase. In the Hall of the Americas of the OAS headquarters in DC, it's a building that was built over a century ago. In each of the 4 corners, the word Pax is carved on it, peace. It is one of our essential goals, but it is not a goal that stands alone. Justice and democracy, we consider, are needed to achieve and maintain peace. Peace without democracy and justice is not long-lasting peace. Article 1 of the OAS Charter mentions a first reason to establish the organization, to achieve an order of peace and justice. And our Inter-American Democratic Charter, which was approved in 2001, 20 years ago, considers democracy as indispensable for the stability, peace, and development of the region. This is one of the main lessons that we would like to share today. The goal of peace processes should not only be the end of violence or mark the end of a conflict, but the attainment of justice and human rights. I will talk about this issue in detail later. First, I will briefly comment on some of the mechanisms for the peaceful settlement of disputes that are available within the OAS. Second, I will mention some emblematic peace and mediation missions that have been deployed. And third, I will share some observations on the role of regional organizations in new international crises and some observations of what we can perhaps do better. So first, a word on the OAS Peace and Conflict Resolution Toolkit that is available. As a premier political forum of the Western Hemisphere, which the OAS has 34 member states, it has a decision-making political forum which monitors conflict and can act accordingly. The Secretary General also can monitor and act when there is an interruption of constitutional order, as indicated by Article 20 of the Inter-American Democratic Charter. So it's not only that a mandate can originate from the request of a member state, but the Secretary General can invoke this article and take action. The use of good offices by the political leadership of the organization, by the Secretary General and special representatives is a commonly employed mechanism, as well as the deployment of fact-finding and mediation missions. The OAS has at its disposal legal instruments for peaceful settlement of disputes and the possibility also of imposing coercive sanctions. Given the importance of democracy and human rights pillars in our organization, there are also mechanisms specifically to address the promotion and protection of these principles. These include, for instance, electoral monitoring and assistance, technical cooperation, active liaison with civil society and NGOs, emergency defense of democracy mechanisms, human rights instruments such as obviously we have the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, Inter-American Court of Human Rights, and recently the American Declaration on Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Throughout its history, dozens of missions have been deployed for varying purposes, different duration, and specific characteristics. One of the first emblematic OAS peace missions in the post-Cold War era was the International Commission for Support and Verification in Nicaragua. According to the OAS Peace Fund, between 1990 and 1997, the CIAV, the acronym for the mission, demobilized 22,500 fighters and repatriated 18,000 Nicaraguans from Honduras and Costa Rica. It distributed food, clothing, and tools to approximately 120,000 people and administered reintegration programs. The mission also mediated between the government and the Catholic Church in a commission to investigate human rights violations. And it assisted the Nicaraguan government and grassroots institutions in local government, conflict mediation, and human rights. And of course, when I heard the presentation by Dr. Horvath-Stenner from OSCE, when she mentioned how sometimes peace processes can be fixed and cannot adapt to changing situations, I think this is a good example of how perhaps this mission, this peace process was emblematic, was historic, but if you judge by the quality of governance, of democracy and rule of law today in Nicaragua, we definitely have lessons to learn of considering the situation in which the country is right now. For more than 2 decades as well, the OAS has played a key role in the long-standing territorial referendum between the governments of Belize and Guatemala. Under the auspices of the Secretary General, the two governments restarted talks in 2000. The process since has been successful because it has achieved key agreements, including the 2008 special agreement to resolve the dispute through the ICJ. Also confidence building measures, as well as the respect for an adjacency zone and an adjacency line, where the OAS has till today an office for the purpose of fostering community-community contacts across the adjacency line and verifying any transgression of the established confidence building measures. Before the pandemic started, Belizeans and Guatemalans voted in favor of resolving this territorial, insular, and maritime dispute in the ICJ in The Hague. And the case is there right now. And until then, the OAS will remain with its office operating in the adjacency zone. And a third example, a third example, in Colombia, the OAS has worked for 17 years through its mission to support the peace process. The MAP is a mission of the OAS in Colombia. The MAP is present with 18 regional offices and it has its headquarters in Bogota. It centers its work on supporting victims, first and foremost. Also reintegration processes, programs of voluntary substitution of illegal crops, follow-up of development programs with a territorial focus, integral rural reform, and demining efforts. The mandate of the MAP was formulated under the principles of autonomy, neutrality, and flexibility, allowing it to work on different areas that contribute to peace building in Colombia. Just weeks ago, in early October, the mandate was renewed and extended until 2024. So these are some examples of past and ongoing OAS missions. And the OAS has done its job to the best of its ability, but we have to be honest, it is not enough. Achieving and maintaining peace is one of the most difficult tasks in the most violent region of the world. And like the ASEAN-IPR director said at the beginning, peace is not kumbaya, it's hard work. It's hard work, and especially in Latin America, which has a notable history of violence. The reality is one in which either violence or negative peace dominates and not positive peace. So we should definitely strive to attain that. COVID-19 has made it more challenging to promote and maintain stability in some contexts. The MAP, for instance, the mission in Colombia, reported that between July 1st and December 31st of last year, it carried out 7,296 monitoring and accompaniment activities by phone and virtually in 614 towns. So the format had to be adapted to the new reality. The work doesn't stop. And the challenges are not just in terms of how missions are carried out in this new context, adopting new virtual formats, but also how the context in the region is rapidly changing in terms of the unmet needs and demands of vulnerable populations. International organizations and foreign actors must catch up with the changing times and the escalating conflicts during and post-COVID. Like it has been mentioned before, the pandemic has exacerbated vulnerabilities and brought to light the profound social and economic inequalities of this Latin America, which is the most unequal region in the world. For millions, lockdown represented the inability to work and bring food to the table. For millions, access to vaccines was not a reality until recently, if at all. According to the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, the pandemic repercussions will cause the most severe recession in Latin America since 1914 and 1930. This means that grievances that were already present in many countries have deepened. Heightened grievances translate into higher probability of social unrest and conflict. So COVID-19 is forcing us to learn new lessons and fast, but also to relearn old lessons and fast as well. So I cannot not mention the elephant in the room, in our room, which is the Venezuelan crisis. It has become every day more of an intractable conflict. And Venezuela is putting to the test the ability and the efficiency of international organizations and foreign state actors in supporting conflict resolution and achieving peace. This is the worst humanitarian crisis in the Western Hemisphere in recent history, in modern history. With 6 million Venezuelans that have fled the Maduro regime, it has become the second largest refugee crisis in the world. A third of Venezuelans are food insecure, and gross human rights violations and crimes against humanity have been widely recorded and denounced. The international community, let's be honest, has failed in the practice of preventive diplomacy in this case. It has also failed to manage and prevent conflict escalation. And as the several attempts to dialogue and negotiation have shown, it has also failed to arrive at an agreement and end the crisis. So certain old and new lessons must be internalized. And I'm going to offer at least 7 ideas, 7 observations that we can perhaps later talk about a little bit more in during the discussion. So lesson 1, negotiations cannot be pursued just for the sake of negotiations. The end goal should be peace and justice, not arriving at a negotiation table. The dialogue, a dialogue, should address the causes for the conflict and not solely how power will be shared in a post-agreement context. Lesson 2, who mediates matters, and a lot. It is increasingly difficult in a highly polarized environment around the globe, but also in the region that has really worsened with COVID-19, to find unbiased mediators who can play the role of effective communicators, formulators, or manipulators in the case of a stalemate, if it's given. Lesson 3, a peace process where not all the parties involved in a conflict are represented is not ideal. The peace process in Colombia was historic, for sure, but it involved the government and one of the guerrilla groups. In the latest Venezuelan negotiation attempt, the one that failed in Mexico, some members of the interim government were not allowed to be present. This also poses a moral question. In the Venezuelan context, some of the actors involved in the crisis are human rights violators, drug traffickers, and members of organized crime. Do you negotiate with leaders responsible for crimes against humanity? Cartel de los Soles with FARC dissidents? It's a difficult process ahead. Lesson 4, post-conflict peace building is just as important as negotiating the end of a conflict. Perhaps it is less glamorous and there is not a photo op or you don't get a peace prize, but it is the hardest and most important phase to ensure that peace is long and lasting. The progress of the implementation of the Colombian peace process, for instance, could be greater if the Colombian state had at its disposal the estimated $44 billion required over 10 years to actually implement the agreement. COVID-19 has made it even harder because it has represented a very, very difficult fiscal stress on the government, on state finances, because it's responding to the sanitary crisis in addition to the Venezuelan refugee crisis. So there is less resources available to implement the peace process. Lesson 5, the international community must work in a more coordinated and unified fashion, because this has not been the case in Venezuela and in other instances as well of crisis in the region and on this side of the world. Well, for instance, in Venezuela, some are working to create a mutually hurting stalemate or the identification of a mutually enticing opportunity for the parties involved. Others seem to be reinforcing the status quo. So if the international community is sending mixed signals and working in a very with a lack of coordination, we cannot expect a favorable resolution in the short or medium term. Lesson 6, with COVID-19, states and the international community have certainly come to have a full plate situation. And the problem there is, my concern is that if member states feel they have a full plate with COVID, then they will pay less attention to conflicts that are brewing, and they will lose the capacity to address it. So we cannot let the full plate situation become an excuse not to tackle ongoing conflicts that are affecting the most vulnerable populations. And last but not least, the last observation, lesson 7. I mentioned at the start that even though we have the word peace card in our 4 pillars, it is not the only goal. We firmly believe, and it is in our foundational documents and charter, democracy is necessary to achieve and maintain peace. There is no valid peace process where democracy and justice are absent. So I look forward to discussing these ideas and others, and I'm thank you again for the invitation. And it's remarkable also to see 4 women presenting. We don't get to see that very often on this side of the world. So congratulations on that. I really appreciate it, and look forward to the discussion.
Yes, Ms. Vidaurri, this is a big present for ASEAN-IPR. I think 4 presenter and speakers are all women. Congratulations. We have a significant point made by Ms. Vidaurri regarding how to embed the indigenous knowledge and practices as the voice of the South on the conflict management. We also have heard about how the COVID and post-COVID affecting the practice of conflict management there. The situation is changing according to Ms. Vidaurri, and she gave us 7 important lessons to take care, to take notes carefully. Thank you very much. It's a really nice point of view you made. Okay, for the last speaker, which is Ms. Teresa Whitfield. Let me read your profile. She is Director of Policy and Mediation Division of United Nations Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, DPPA. Ms. Whitfield started her career as a journalist and writer, then built an extensive career in the field of peace. Her work, including working on Central American and Colombian peace processes as a fellow of New York University Center on International Cooperation and teaching at the Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs. She also performed consultancy and advisory roles to organizations such as the Social Science Research Council, Center for Humanitarian Dialogue, and Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Okay, 20 minutes or less is yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And really, I'd like to thank Ambassador Putra and other colleagues for the invitation to participate in this really timely webinar. I remember very warmly, I think it was one of the last in-person meetings I attended before COVID made us all work through Zoom, attending the ASEAN-UN Regional Dialogue on the ASEAN-IPR pool of experts in Hanoi back in December 2019. I hope we can soon get back to meeting in person. I also welcome the comparative focus of this discussion on the work of our distinct organizations. It's been great to hear from colleagues in the OSCE, the African Union, and the OAS. We have a lot to learn from each other's distinct experiences. And from the United Nations, I can also say that we've got a lot to learn from our different experiences of working together. UN engagement with regional organizations, particularly with respect to peace and security cooperation, is one of the Secretary General Antonio Guterres's core priorities. ASEAN's Institute of Peace, the IPR, is exceptionally well placed to convene this important discussion. ASEAN, since its founding, has played an important role in the region through diplomacy, conflict prevention, and peace building. And after its establishment back in the 1960s, you've gained so much experience in addressing interstate as well as intrastate conflict situations. And I should note that the comprehensive partnership between ASEAN and the United Nations, which the agreement was adopted in 2011, has enabled increasingly close engagement between ASEAN-IPR and the UN in technical areas, including the prevention of violent extremism, ceasefire mediation, and women, peace and security. Noting that we're all women here today, I'd particularly like to congratulate ASEAN on its recent efforts to advance the women, peace and security agenda, including the first ASEAN's Women's Peace Registry, and to reaffirm our willingness on the part of the UN to provide technical support to help develop the ASEAN Regional Plan on Women, Peace and Security for next year. My job as the Director of the Policy and Mediation Division in the UN means that I work with an excellent team of staff who work on a range of issues: mediation support, women, peace and security, youth inclusion in peace processes, but also subjects such as climate security. And we support a number of UN-led peace processes and missions across the world. We work closely with many regional and sub-regional organizations to share UN experiences, lessons learned, and help build capacities when requested. I'll begin by sharing a few thoughts on UN peacemaking and how we're working with regional and sub-regional organizations to respond more effectively to the many challenges we face today. The UN's global role in peacemaking and conflict resolution is rooted in the Charter, the UN Charter, which designates the United Nations Security Council as the body with primary responsibility for international peace and security, and a founding purpose to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. The characteristics of the UN as an actor for peace include its impartiality, its steadfast championing of norms, rights, and values, peaceful solutions, and diplomacy consistent with international law, and its openness to dialogue and communication with all, and thus readiness to serve as a trusted channel. All of these, of course, rest on the universal membership of the United Nations and the fact that the United Nations is made up of the member states from all across the world. In addition to the more publicly visible presence of UN peacekeeping operations and special political missions in some regions of the world, especially in Africa and the Middle East, though we also have a couple in Latin America, much of this work falls under the broad description of good offices, whether conducted by the Secretary General himself or the envoys, representatives, and officials who work on his behalf. And among the most recently appointed of these is Noeleen Heyzer, who's the new Special Envoy on Myanmar, who of course very well known to ASEAN colleagues on this call. As described by a former colleague of mine, Tamrat Samuel, who for years was the director of the Asia Pacific Division at the UN, good offices is a very broad term for any third-party assistance given to conflicting parties to help find a solution to their problems. It can take many different forms. It may include, but is not limited to, mediation, can involve advising parties to a conflict or governments, carrying messages between opposing sides, or facilitating contact between groups without necessarily directly injecting the mediator or a third party into the process. It also could mean providing specialized expertise to discussions and generally being a catalyst. In fact, there's a range of choices within what the broad concept of good offices means. So in practice, what this has meant has varied greatly. The many examples of good offices initiatives undertaken by Secretaries General themselves. Secretary General U Thant, for example, is famous for helping prevent nuclear confrontation over the Cuban Missile Crisis. Secretary General Perez de Cuellar helped end the Iran-Iraq war in 1997. But the quiet diplomacy of the Secretary General and those who work for him is often takes place behind closed doors or in support of others. It relies on and is predicated on the consent of the parties, the UN's ability to talk to anyone, patience to build relationships and trust, and understand positions and seek opportunities to pursue peaceful solutions. And it is supported by an open offer for dialogue and a readiness to provide capacity building in a wide range of areas. Turning to cooperation with regional organizations. Regional and sub-regional organizations are important and in many instances absolutely essential partners in preventive diplomacy and peacemaking, and as we've heard in many instances, take the lead and are the primary actors in their regions. We share with our regional partners a deep commitment to an effective multilateral system, mindful that multilateralism is not only about confronting shared threats, but also about seizing common opportunities. Strengthening UN partnerships with regional organizations in line with Chapter 8 of the Charter is an integral part of the Secretary General's vision of a more effective, networked, and inclusive multilateralism. By this, he means stronger coordination between regional and international organizations, as well as international financial institutions, recognizing that we're all working towards the same goal. Our investment in partnerships has translated to more effective engagements before the onset of crises, sometimes with concrete operational results. Our ability to work together and build on our complementarities allows us to more effectively support member states in managing complex political transitions and in finding sustainable solutions to political challenges at the heart of our work on preventing conflict. The United Nations and regional organizations have complementary capacities which, when properly coordinated, can contribute decisively to the prevention and management of armed conflict. Across its work, my department is in regular contact with our counterparts in regional organizations to ensure information sharing and cooperation on a wide range of issues. To give just a few examples, in Somalia, the joint engagement of the UN, the African Union, the Intergovernmental Authority for Development and the European Union with the parties help prevent escalation in the context of a fraught process leading to elections. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, the UN is working with the European Union, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and the Council of Europe to support local efforts to advance dialogue, trust building, and reconciliation. In supporting the Libyan-led, Libyan-owned dialogue process in transition, the UN is working closely with the AU, the League of Arab States, and the EU, including in the context of the Berlin Process and Quartet. One area of increasing collaboration with regional organizations and recognized in the ASEAN UN Plan of Action is the growing impact of climate change on peace and security. In many of the most climate vulnerable regions of the world, regional organizations lead efforts to build resilience and address climate risks. We support them to scale up sustainable solutions and build capacity at national and local levels. In 2018, DPPA, that my department, jointly with the UN Development Programme and the United Nations Environment Programme, UNEP, created the Climate Security Mechanism, a mechanism to coordinate our different expertise and capacities to better connect what we can bring to the table and understand the cross-cutting risk of climate security of climate change to peace and security. In the Pacific, we're working with the Pacific Islands Forum to operationalize the regional security framework laid out in the Boe Declaration and develop climate security risk management strategies in low-lying atoll nations. In Central Africa and in West Africa and the Sahel, we're working with sub-regional organizations to build a shared understanding of climate risks and develop strategies to manage their impact on peace and security at regional, national, and local levels. Others have mentioned, and we all, of course, are in an environment in which COVID-19 shapes our work. The past 2 years have been really challenging for all of us, and we've recognized that COVID has created serious risks for peace and security and instability in the years to come. In addition to the risk of tensions arising from the severe socioeconomic impacts of the pandemic, as well as other phenomena such as the rise in gender-based violence that Mukondeleli mentioned, we're concerned about the decline in trust in public institutions. We just heard about the broad impacts across Latin America, including as a result of widespread disinformation about the virus and government responses, and a rise that we've seen in hate speech. While we've not observed a significant change in the dynamics of a number of the ongoing armed conflicts as a result of COVID-19, the prevention challenge is increasing due to the heightened social and economic pressures and the inequalities caused by the prolonged public health emergency. At the UN, both at headquarters and the field, we've adapted our operations in order to continue providing support to member states and our partners. The initial limitations to movement forced most of our missions to resort to telecommuting and virtual diplomacy. Political engagement with national stakeholders through remote means has been a challenge in some settings and for certain types of processes, and put increased importance on local structures, capacity, and engagements. Since late 2020, we've moved to hybrid arrangements, taking calculated risks, meeting in person when the circumstances demand, and trying to limit risks to ourselves and our interlocutors when virtual engagements will suffice. Making virtue out of necessity, we've also adapted our work as we learned better how to engage using digital technologies. New tools such as digital focus groups and WhatsApp dialogues have been used to broaden the inclusiveness of our engagements and ensure that outreach to partners such as women's groups and civil society actors has been maintained. But of course, there are issues related to inequalities in access and connectivity. A final and obvious point on COVID is that the low vaccination rates in almost all but the wealthiest countries and the growing number of virus variants risks prolonging the pandemic and thus further exacerbating poverty and marginalization, fueling old grievances and creating new ones. This could potentially increase instability. I hope I've tried to keep things relatively brief because there's a lot on the table and I hope there's lots of time for Q&A. But I hope that what I've said has illustrated both our ability and the benefits of working together and the potential to further build on our complementarities to more effectively support member states in managing complex political transitions and in finding sustainable solutions to conflicts. I look forward to hearing from others on how they think the UN and regional and sub-regional organizations can strengthen the linkages amongst us that we already have, so that we can continue to work in a collaborative spirit to end the scourge of war and confront interlocking challenges such as COVID-19 and climate change that face millions of people around the world today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Whitfield. It's such a broad analysis, but deep on the same time. You mentioned about the roles of UN in as a multinational organization, particularly dealing with so many complex complex political transitional processes. Preventing conflict is one of the main roles, and coordinating roles among countries particularly is most challenging. Sometimes you mentioned that. There is a collaborative works with ASEAN element on climate changing, affecting the peace processes and conflict mediation. And you mentioned also some of the technology and communication tools can be utilized to enhance the roles of UN. Thank you very much, Ms. Whitfield. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, friends all, we have around 30 minutes to discuss some of the topics raised by our participants. As far as I take notes, there are 4 main questions. All of this related to so many different aspects of the topic we discussed, the experiences of several continents. The first question is from Ayesha Abu Bakar. It is this question is raised for Ms. Mpeiwa and Ms. Vidaurri. Any of you can respond this one. The question is basically about how to adopt and mainstreaming the traditional and indigenous knowledge and experiences in peace building or peacemaking. That's the first question. I think we deal with one question first and then move into another one. Please, Ms. Vidaurri or Ms. Mpeiwa, any of you can respond that question?
I have I can start.
Yes, please.
Okay. I think we need more something. I mean, it's just something more practical. We need more representation of the indigenous populations that exist in the Americas in the structure of the OAS. Representation within the structure of the OAS. Just as we need more women, we need more of that within the organization. And the OAS benefits if it maintains a constant liaison with NGOs and organizations that represent indigenous peoples, not just during the General Assembly, but throughout the year and throughout its different activities. Yes.
I'm sorry, Ms. Vidaurri. Some of our participants are really not expert in this field. Can you elaborate example, for example, how the traditional and the indigenous knowledge can be a voice of the South in terms of making peace building?
We need more participation of representatives from indigenous populations in our region, in the structures that actually work in regional organizations. So at the OAS, we need more representatives working with us in the organization and in the field, and not just have contact with these groups and with these organizations when it's, one time a year, when it's the annual General Assembly. So we need to do better in that sense to incorporate their perspectives into the processes and the missions and that are deployed.
Can I push the question further? Because Ms. Mpeiwa mentioning about it is a time for Africa to take the lead in the process, in charge. The question of ownership of the process itself, is that part of the thing you emphasize in this? Ms. Vidaurri?
Yes. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I think I understand what you would. Yes. Of course, the solutions for the conflicts and the crises that we're facing in the region are the Organization of American States and the member states are best equipped to first address those crises, because the solution has to come from within. But we do need the support of other international actors. But we need to do better at the coordination of those actions. And in terms of Venezuela, for instance, so yes, the solution has to come from within Venezuela. But as we have seen, they cannot do it alone. 6 million people have left. And not only within the regime is not the only actor present, and it doesn't really have territorial control. There are other non-state actors that have power and authority over certain parts of the territory. The opposition is highly fragmented and weak. So they do need the support of the international organization. They do need the support of regional partners. They cannot do it alone. But of course, at the end of the day, it has to come from within. So it's very tricky. It's very tricky. It cannot be imposed from abroad, but it can also, in this case, in the case of the Venezuelan crisis, it cannot be a solution that comes solely from within, because they do need the support and the resources.
Thank you, Ms. Vidaurri. Now the second question is related to the maybe this one is really reflecting the experience of ASEAN right now. It's the question about mediators. Yeah, how to identify the good mediators? I think that the question is for Ms. Whitfield. How to identify good mediators and how the politics to make it function, because mediator not only representing the country, but also sometimes need to represent the regions. So each countries have a cloud or interest in this. Maybe Ms. Whitfield or Ms. White.
Thank you very much. It's a very good and difficult question. I think it's important to also distinguish between, and perhaps the way into this is thinking about the difference between mediation and diplomacy. We all engage, that there is a different kind of skill set and posture that's sometimes needed, which combines the both in a single person. So somebody who may be a diplomat but has a role as a mediator will be required. The very essence of a mediator is to be between and facilitating and supporting discussions between opposing parties. So it requires a good deal of empathy, patience, impartiality to a certain extent. Even if you're in a conflict where the parties may be doing horrible, horrible things, you cannot, as a mediator, if you're trying to mediate a conflict between a government and armed group, for example, you can't come in with a position where I can't meet with the armed group, or indeed the government. The military might have done very, very appalling things. You have to be able to suspend some of that to bring technical expertise and patience and a capacity to listen. So it can be very complicated identifying a mediator, because that you have an overlay of the technical and personal qualities that are needed to mediate. And in many instances, there will be also concerns about national or regional identity and whether a certain country would be acceptable in a different context. So that's one thing that is challenging.
Can you push that question? We push that question further. Are there any experiences, global experiences, enabling us to respond with the interests of each countries need to be negotiated, and United Nations need to be in the middle? How to make it?
Whether there's also questions. I mean, in many contexts, the UN is in the lead of several processes. The UN leads in processes only at the request of, the consent of the parties is absolutely fundamental. And in many contexts, the parties might not want the UN there. They might not want something at that level. They will be more comfortable with a regional or a local mediator. And I'll come back a little bit to local processes, which are really, really, really important. But the consent, the acceptance by the parties of what entity or who might be the mediator is fundamental to that process. And the UN will never push itself into a situation where it is not wanted. And nor does that matter very much. I mean, one of the aspects of our work in mediation support is it underlines that the UN is very happy to provide the support at all different levels. In some places, in Yemen or Libya or Syria, we have mandates from the Security Council, we have missions, we have envoys who have a mandate to try and lead very difficult processes in support of the national actors. And in those contexts, they engage very actively with all the regional actors involved and with the African Union on Libya and League of Arab States, as I mentioned earlier. But in other circumstances, the UN won't be the mediator. Colombia is an interesting example. As was mentioned, there's been a long OAS presence there. There was quite a formal process of negotiation between the government and the FARC, the biggest of the many armed groups in Colombia. There wasn't a mediator. There was facilitation role played by Norway and Cuba. The parties didn't want a mediator, and they didn't want the UN in the process of the talks until very late, when the UN was brought in to provide technical expertise on the ceasefire and the end of the conflict. And then the UN was asked to set up a mission through the Security Council to help with implementation of some aspects of the agreements. So the UN, even in that context, the UN can play a very flexible role. And then there are other places on peace processes in Africa where we maybe work. In West Africa, for example, we work in very close partnership with ECOWAS, the sub-regional organization, which will usually almost always have the lead on sub-regional processes, and we can provide support with the African Union. And in other contexts, we provide support which is sort of much more invisible behind the scenes. So one of the sort of advantages of the UN is it can engage at different levels, whether there's a huge peacekeeping operation in some countries or just very behind the scenes, quiet support and advice.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Whitfield. I want to hear the response from the regional, because when you select and elect one mediator, facilitator to solve the problem internally, quote unquote, in the region, everybody knows each other. Is that a problem, or it's more like a merit or the benefit of that, or it is a cost of that? Maybe Ms. Horvath-Stenner?
Yes, thank you. Well, it depends. I think it depends on who they chose for. In general, as mentioned at the beginning, this is like a duty or a right up to the chairship to assign their mediators. And of course, the Secretariat is always happy to advise them, to provide them with contacts, and also to promote a reflection not only on the political way, like not only to look out for political weights, but also to look for diplomats or non-diplomats with more mediation expertise and more mediation experience. So this is something we try to promote and advise the incoming chairs on. And of course, the inclusion of women. This is always for a year, and sometimes it works very well. It's also a funding question, and then the incoming chair, the chair of the next year, is continuing with the assignments of a particular lead mediator. That's how we do it.
Okay. I continue the question to Ms. Christina Horvath, because there's a question from Mr. Reslan about how to define peace and peace processes, given the developing concept of human security. And Mr. Reslan gave an example about the situation in between Belarus and Poland right now, with the displaced people, refugee, and now like the suffering and the shape of 10 and very many situations there. And he asked a question about how to define this situation, because there is two processes on the same time. It's a peace building, but on the same time also security issues. So how you differentiate the two? How you see the connection?
Yes, thank you. I think it's well observed. I think this situation is like, it will be very interesting, and actually it's like the look into the glass bowl. Do you say so in English? So it's really question like, it's like, I cannot answer. We will see. It's in particular interesting because Poland will be the incoming chair next year. So bringing also, as previous chairs, they are not the only state, but bringing also internal challenges into their year of chairship. I think, I'm not sure whether Reslan was also the one like referring to the difference between NATO and OSCE.
Yes,
So,
yes, that
yeah,
one.
right. Like I can only answer in my personal capacity. I think it is, of course, we always have waves. We have these waves where it's more where organizations and other bodies merge and integrate into each other, and then we have a counter phase where we separate more and try to find our differences. And at the moment, very practical, I don't see any attempts or chances, a likelihood for integration of these different organizations, which I, in a personal capacity, also deem very useful. I think it's useful to have different organizations that can be addressed for different issues, to provide as much as response area to those needs in the field. Yeah.
Okay. There is a question from our friend Kwai Sumu from Myanmar about what does relative conflict analysis means, and whether we can control conflict, we can achieve peace. I think that we start that question to Ms. Vidaurri from the regional perspective, and also from Ms. Whitfield from the global point of view. And then Ms. Christina Horvath can respond to that point also. So can we control conflict to achieve peace?
Can we control conflict?
To achieve peace.
To achieve peace. Oh. I mean, there are, I think it's a difficult question, of course. And I think one thing we can highlight is that certainly conflict management and conflict resolution has its limitations. And I'm thinking obviously from my bias and the perspective of a Latin American, and I'm a Mexican, so also from that lens. The greatest threat to security and instability in our region is by far drug trafficking, organized crime. How do you control that? How can you achieve peace in this region if you don't manage that? And it's a very difficult, I mean, you don't do that through mediation. What are the instruments that are in place at the national, both for member states and international level, to deal with this challenge that sees no borders and that really, really destabilizes whatever efforts have been made at democratic building, democratic institutions? So it's very difficult. I mean, and of course, I'm answering this question from my perspective. There might be many other answers. But when I was preparing for today, I was thinking, okay, yes, there have been many crises. We have had like transitions to peace and democracy. We have challenges today, but what is the underlying factor that really continuously erodes and pushes us back towards instability and conflict? It's violence, and it's the drug trade. They really co-opt institutions and have a very strong presence, territorial, across the region, and you can't deal with that with the formal processes of mediation. So what can we do?
Ms. Vidaurri, if we push the question further, because some of those complexity is there, and intersectionality of the problem also, you cannot sort it easily. Where is the root? Where is the cause? What is the processes? Is that happening there?
I think, I mean, many things have been tried in the last For instance, in one country, there was a frontal war against the drug trafficking, and it really rendered with a lot of human rights violations at the end of the day. There was other examples, for instance, Plan Colombia, which really pushed back organized crime. This was with the US intervention, well, the US support to the government of Colombia. But look at where it is now. So it's a very long-term process, and it's a multilateral challenge, international challenge with international solution. But because obviously we're democracies and we change every 4 to 6 years governments, and now that it's switching between two different very polarized positions, as we have seen in recent years, there is no continuity in the policy. So it's a difficult.
Yes. It's democracy can be a liability in some point because of the discontinuity, is changing emphasis, many things. Miss Christina, before we go to Miss Whitfield, Miss Horvath, how is the regional experiences dealing with the issues of controlling conflict before achieving peace?
Just to understand this question correctly, like with controlling conflict, you mean like there were earlier references to conflict analysis, or?
Yes, a relative conflict analysis. Our friend from Myanmar asking a question, what does relative conflict analysis mean? Can we control conflict to achieve peace?
Yes. Okay.
It's kind of a philosophical question.
Yeah, then I understood correctly. And of course, now my answer comes from like someone who believes in methodology of mediation. I think without a proper conflict analysis, you should not even engage too much. And just to understand me correctly, like a conflict analysis is something for me, I mean, analyzing dynamics, actors, interests, etc., historical developments, root causes. There are a zillion of aspects you can analyze. And this is something that I do not understand static. So conflict analysis is something I think you constantly need to do it. You also should do it in teams, because it's not about having the final picture then or the final report of a conflict analysis. I think the actual value in conflict analysis is in doing it together, because it streamlines your thinking within your mediation team and may also within the negotiation team. Conflict analysis is surely not only something for the mediators, but for the negotiators as well. It streamlines your thinking and shapes some agreement of what is actually the final objective. And do we all share this final objective? Often, of course, it's also, I think it's too romantic to think everybody wants peace, right? States or conflict parties have different kind of interests, and sometimes they match peace, sometimes not. And conflict analysis is useful to also consider or examine your room for maneuver. For example, as the OSCE, and I said there are many things the OSCE can do well and has strength on, but there are also weaknesses from the same kind of setup it has. So to realize when looking at a conflict and made, for example, internal unrest in Belarus, as mentioned before, reoccurring violence in Armenia, Azerbaijan on the border. So to look at it and to realize, okay, what can we as the OSCE do, from fact-finding mission to media statements, to assigning personal or special representatives, to have a field operation on the ground with projects, etc. All these tools and means to be conflict analysis helps to be aware of that, and also what we cannot do and who else could do it. Like what kind of structures are there on the ground, thinking of traditional religious figures as insider mediators, etc. Okay. And last but not least,
yes.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, please. Continue.
Just one sentence also to make it a little bit more practical. As I'm sure large part of our audience today know that a peace process is often separated in different baskets, right? They are like economic working groups, political, humanitarian working groups, social security working groups. And I realized that there are different ways how to approach these negotiations, which somehow represents then the ongoing conflict just with non-violent means. And you can separate these issues, you can try to depoliticize them, you can accept the complexity in order to get to this control of conflict, as you mentioned it, and then looking for low-hanging fruits and build up from them and shape some precedences. So there are different ways how to deal with this complexity. But back to the question, I think it all requires proper conflict analysis, and that's why these mediation experts and the methodological expertise needs to be further integrated and institutionalized in these political processes and discussions, starting from who will be appointed the next mediator.
Okay. So mediator issues also one of the suggestion you made here. Okay, Miss Whitfield, do you want to respond to that point?
Yeah, I went out and coming back a bit to some of the points raised by from the Latin Americans' perspective. I think we have to recognize that I'm going to be a bit gloomy, I'm afraid, but at a global level, thinking about peace and security challenges and our response to the evolution of armed conflict and violence is incredibly difficult right now. It's a really, really challenging moment. We have the overlay of COVID, we have climate change exacerbating conflict across the world, not directly causing it, but complicating the human security dilemmas across the world. And then the evolution and the nature of armed conflict means that there are fewer and fewer conflicts which lend themselves to a kind of classical mediation, the sort of mediation negotiation processes we saw emerge at the end of the Cold War, whether in Cambodia or in Southern Africa or Central America. Now we have much more messy situations through a couple of reasons. Most of the conflicts are enmeshed in very difficult regional and sometimes geopolitical dynamics. So there are different pressures on conflicts coming from the surrounding region. Many of the conflicts are fragmented, so you have multiple armed actors. You have the injection of factors such as organized crime and drug trafficking, and not only in Latin America, but in many other places. You don't have like one big armed conflict in a country. There's lots of violence, which is not necessarily conflict related, but is armed violence with devastating impacts on populations that's actually killing more people at the moment. The non-armed conflict violence kills more people than the classic armed conflict violence. And you have a nebulous mix of groups who don't necessarily have clear political goals. They have a mix of political ideologies, religious, some extremist motivations, sometimes pure criminal motivations. And you can have all of this mixed up in, many of the conflicts that we're engaged in Africa have, hundreds of armed groups in constant flux, or many, many tens, and the lines between them geographically, regionally, and in terms of popular support changes. So it's a really difficult environment. What this means is that we need peacemakers, we need mediators, we need others. You need to be fostering regional support because you never get a solution. You won't get a durable solution to situations of conflict unless the region in the surrounding area is behind a durable solution. If the regional countries are pulling in different directions, it won't work. But from the UN, it also has put increased emphasis on a kind of integrated response. And the UN is a big and quite fragmented organization in the past. I think the Secretary General came in with a strong sense that in the past, its work on political peacekeeping issues, its work on development, its work on human rights was too dispersed. And so he's put a big effort on bringing us together and encouraging us to work in an integrated way, because if we don't get the development assistance lined up with our more political engagements and thinking about human rights, recognizing their distinct priorities, but it isn't as if we can work separately. So it's a really, really challenging moment.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Whitfield. Okay, for the last part of this dialogue, can I ask each of you to give 1 minute insight or messages on peace processes for ASEAN or for ASEAN-IPR for its birthday? 1 minute messages present for ASEAN-IPR or ASEAN peace processes. Maybe I start from Ms. Vidaurri.
Okay. Well, once again, happy birthday. I think the work that you do is remarkable, and thank you for connecting us, because this is where I've already learned so much from my colleagues, from you, and I will take that to my work, to my team, and I think we have to have more points of contact that are political, that are technical, because we are in a phase, as you are 9 years old, you're entering, I believe globally, a new phase, like Ms. Whitfield was saying, with the nature of conflicts is changing. And very importantly, the role of the United States is changing as well. For our region, for the rest of the world, the powers are shifting. And we have to find a place to catch up with the challenges, the multiple challenges, and see how we can face it. And I think the last element that I will mention is that we're lucky that even though we have many challenges, we're lucky that at this point in time, international law and international organizations have evolved in such a robust way that we should just, follow international law, implement our mandates, and work together. I mean, because we do have the roadmap. We just have to follow the principles. And it's been wonderful to be here today. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. Ms. Horvath-Stenner.
Yes, thank you. It was a great opportunity to be honest, to introduce the OSCE and its set up a little bit to this great audience. I think it's fantastic to see, I think you mentioned at the beginning, 200 persons registered or in the audience. It's fascinating to see this kind of interest in our organizations and in the topic as such. And I also think that it's a great example of how to use digitization for inclusive approaches, not to mention also the women inclusion. And looking at the panel, this is quite unusual for me, but very welcome. Besides my best happy birthday wishes and happy anniversary wishes to you as ASEAN-IPR, I would highlight, as mentioned before, the need and the great opportunity, also thinking of these new times induced by COVID on us, to promote mediation professionalism. And I think political and technical expertise and experience go hand in hand. And the more they are both recognized equally, the better for the processes, because this is also an answer to the complexity of our nowadays processes. And that's why I can just really promote, and I think you did a great job with this exercise, with this event today here, in giving recognition to this professional mediation expertise. Happy birthday.
Thank you very much. Ms. Whitfield.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, happy birthday, and it's great to be with you again, if only virtually. You know, our friends in ASEAN and ASEAN-IPR can count on us for support on a whole range of issues. We've already worked well on ceasefire mediation, on women, peace and security. I look forward to further engagement. Youth, peace and security is something we could do more on. The emerging field of climate security I mentioned is a really key area. We'd be happy to reach out and be in touch on that. And my final message is just to say I'm looking forward to the 10th birthday, and maybe we can all meet for cake.
Thank you very much. I should close the session because my time is up, and I can wrap up all of the discussion by saying that how much I learned in 2.5 hours from the excellent speakers, from the fascinating question made by our participant, but also now I have some idea to respond to the question on what does it mean new ASEAN way of conflict management is engaging and learning from the experiences from regional actors, and on the same time global experiences as our partners, but most importantly to review back our experiences to make our foundation much deeply rooted internally. So external and internal, that is the new ASEAN way of conflict management, basically. By saying that, I should return back the time and screen to the committee. Ms. Kartika?
Thank you. Thank you very much to Dr. Erawan for moderating this evening's discussion. And thank you as well to our distinguished speakers for their time, for their presentation, and for answering the questions posed by the audience. We do apologize that, some of the questions perhaps we did not have time to answer, but it was nonetheless a very lively and very interesting and very useful discussion, especially for the ASEAN-IPR itself. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of the 6th session of the ASEAN-IPR discussion series. Thank you. Thank you again for celebrating the ASEAN-IPR's 9th anniversary with us through this discussion session. We express appreciation to all attendees in Zoom and viewers on YouTube who have followed the discussion from beginning to end. And you can always review the discussion that has taken place through our YouTube channel. And we hope that you can join our next discussion series. It will be in December, the last one in the series of 7 discussion sessions. In the meantime, we hope you stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you and good evening from Jakarta.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Muchas gracias. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Gracias. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Ketut.
Bye-bye.